The most important part to any zoo is the animals in the enclosures they call home. Throughout the series, I'll be designing different enclosures for an array of animals, whilst also keeping guest interaction at the forefront of every build. Join me each week as I tackle a new enclosure and idea and try and bring it to life within Planet Zoo. Today I'm back in my mini Africa area within my zoo, building an ostrich enclosure. Because I have this lovely long stretch of land next to the giraffe and zebras, I decided it'd be the perfect place for ostriches. Ostriches love to sprint, so I didn't want to fill the space with too much, but I wanted them to have obstacles to run around. I also have this big back wall to cover, which I found a new way to fill in, which we'll see throughout the build. Here are the stats for the ostriches. Land is a very big requirement. Boundary isn't so much, but I do have some high fences throughout the build. The groups sizes, they can be one male up to 7 females, but for my build I had one male and one female in the hope that they will reproduce. I wanted to keep my group size fairly small. Even though I've got this fairly long enclosure, it's not very large, and as we saw from the land requirements that ostriches need, I just wouldn't have the space. To kickstart the build, I'm over at the house, and with this house I wanted to use the two different designs I'd used previously before. So this is more of a sheltered styled house, similar to the capybara one from before, but it does include the keeper gate, which I've obviously attached to a lot of my houses in previous builds. There's some nice big bay windows there. They will be so that guests can see the ostriches, because this part of the enclosure I'm planning to keep separate from guest view. With the house taking shape, it was time to move on to the barriers. With this, I wasn't really sure what style to go with, so I kind of just used the log paneling which I used on the giraffe and zebra house, and made sure it was curved so we were using all that space possible. And later on I just chuck in some mesh fencing so you can actually see the ostriches. Like I say, I was very unsure what to do, because I didn't want to take up too much of the space. With the majority of the fencing in, I knew I needed to make a start on this back wall. So what I started with was using these rocks and sort of lining out where I wanted this wall to be. And like I said, I was segregating that bit outside the house away from the rest of the enclosure. So my plan was to use the rocks as a sort of flower bed, and then sort of smooth that off with some flat rocks on top, and then place some plants and trees along that back wall to really cover that space. And also it's just something different. Instead of theming flags and poles and things like that, I just thought it was a nice little touch, and it was quite easy to pull off. The rock work nearly done, I knew I wanted to continue with this back wall by getting some plants in, so I started with my trusted palm trees that I like so much, but I didn't want to overdo it with certain ones, so I sort of placed some big ones and then moved on to some smaller plants, which you can see I'm doing now, just because I wanted the colours and the height on that back wall. I was taking a bit of a risk with all these plants because I didn't have any ostriches in the enclosure, which I don't normally do, but thankfully ostriches can have quite a bit of coverage, so it all paid off in the end. Continuing with the planting and wanting those obstacles in the enclosure, I used these circular pieces which you can use as building tools and just placed them randomly in the enclosure. I then filled them with this soil piece to then later come back with some different types of plant to fill the space. Whilst waiting for the ostrich to arrive, I thought I'd make a start on the terrain, and because obviously ostriches are found in Africa, I decided to go with the sort of sand effect again, which I realised in this map for some reason the African animals don't really like that, and it's soil, and the soil comes out quite dark, so I was a bit iffy about that, but I later changed that when I did get the ostriches in. Another thing to do while the ostrich was on its way was fill in the glass here. I used one-way glass just so the ostriches had that bit of extra cover whilst in their house. I also saw this as the opportunity to get the keeper gate in and finish off the last little bits of the barrier. The ostrich in the enclosure, this is where I make the changes to the ground level. because it wasn't happy with the sand. So here is that sort of soil effect, which makes it look quite muddy. But I guess if that's what the animal likes, then that's what the animal gets. The ground level now right, I wanted to fill in these little planters in the middle, so I used these slightly larger trees to start with, and then smaller ones in some of the others. I used different types of foliage to fill in the space around the trees as well, because I wanted them to all look different and not just be carbon copies of each other. Trying to put off the fencing for as long as possible, I decided to get the enrichment pieces in, and having that extra space near the house dedicated to that definitely helped. So I think it's something I'm definitely going to consider in more of my builds, because it's the sort of best place to have the foragers, the feeders, the water, because the keepers can access it easily. With not much else to do in the enclosure, it was time to make a start on the fencing, and as you can see, I wasn't really sure what to do, so I just copied the style like the giraffe and zebra, and just sort of dotted in inserts of where you could see the animal. I realised here it's not very good next to the plant pot, but I wanted there to be as many viewing places as possible. I stuck with this design because whilst building I did try and think of other ideas, but nothing was really coming. I thought about copying the aardvark style of the enclosure, but I didn't really want that, and I thought, it was just like carbon copy either side of the giraffe and zebra. And I also have an idea for a meerkat enclosure in the future, which will follow a similar style to the aardvark one, so I didn't want the ostriches to look the same. I did think about some wooden sort of posts and paneling where the mesh is, but I wasn't really set on it. Overall, I'm really happy with this build, especially the planter at the back and the planters in the middle. I think the only thing I would change is that fencing, but it's only a small part of the build, so I can live with it. I did put some small fences in front of the large wooden panels, and also put some TV screens in there so that guests can get all the information about the ostriches they need.